It's just that heaven has come to get you a little earlier. My mother, who had been told she had only a few days to live, said this to me with a smile. She really is a strong person? My mother's words blew something out of the water for me. If I continued to be sad, the time I could spend with my mother would just be wasted. Then, in order to make the rest of my time with her more meaningful, I had no choice but to look forward and walk forward. That is what I told myself. I decided to go home early and tell my husband. Well, so? No need for hospitalization or anything, so it won't cost me that much money, right? Yes, but there will be a certain amount of money for the rental of the ventilator. Well, I will pay for that out of my salary, so don't worry about it. Living with a ventilator, you don't have to do such a bad thing. What did you say? What does my husband think of my mother's life? Don't be silly. How can you say such a terrible thing? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. How could you say such a thing with no offense? But there was no point in bothering my husband any longer. One day after a month had passed while living like this. I had to work late that day, and when I came home around 8 p.m. When I said, "I'm home," there was no response from inside the house. I went to my mother anyway, and to my surprise, her respirator had been unplugged. My mother was in a lot of pain, and my mind went blank for a moment. How could this be happening? But after a moment's pause, I quickly turned on the respirator. My mother managed to regain her composure because she was not completely unable to breathe on her own, but what in the world had happened? What in the world? Actually, Harry pulled it out of me. He told me it was useless to spend more money on a vegetable like you. Harry, the culprit is my husband. The moment I heard this, I completely snapped. My name is Jane and I currently live with my mother. I grew up in a single-parent household, and I am extremely grateful to my mother and still live with her because I did not want to leave her alone. I started working after high school instead of going to college because my mother's health started to deteriorate. My mother had always been frail, and even when I was a child she had to go to the hospital several times, but it seemed that she had been ill for a long time. Around the time I entered high school, her illness began to worsen. I studied and worked part-time to make ends meet, managed to graduate from high school, and got a job as a clerk at a small business near my house. After work, I would come straight home and take care of my mother. That was my life. I'm home, sorry I'm late. I'll get dinner ready in a minute. I'm sorry, I made you do so much. I'm sorry, I'm making you do all the work. I've been so sick lately that I can't move properly. Don't worry about it. People around me are also working and living alone, so this is totally fine. I don't think that living with my mom is going to add to my workload, so don't overthink it. Although my mother was very considerate of me, I feel a little sorry about that. Of course, people were always saying how great it was that I was taking care of my parents from such a young age. I appreciate them saying so, and I am happy for them, but for me, I am just doing what I take for granted. My mother raised me well as a little girl, no matter what the circumstances. No matter how sick and infirm she was, I watched her struggle to get to work. It was all to protect her life with me. Seeing my mother like that, I took it for granted that I would do what I could for her. I was just doing what I had to do, that's all. But I was also young and wanted to be in love. Although I had limited time and money to spend on my mother, I found someone who liked me and we decided to go out to dinner. It's tomorrow, do you mind if I leave the house for a bit? Actually, I've been invited to dinner, and of course, I'll make a meal for you and put it in the fridge, okay? You don't have to worry about me, I can even order food to go or I'll cook a simple meal. You can go out and have fun on the weekends, and you don't have to put me first. My mother said this with a smile, and I felt a little sorry for her, but we decided to go on a date. The man was someone I met through a friend of mine, and he seemed like a kindred spirit who, like me, enjoyed manga and anime. Thanks for coming over today. I'm nervous about our first date, but it's nice to meet you. Thank you too. We were both introverts, so I was quite nervous on our first date, but as we talked, we found that our personalities clicked, and we hit it off right away. After a few more dates, we decided to go out. At the same time, I told him that I had a mother who lived with me and I had to take care of her, but he was serious about a future with me and I trusted him tremendously because he was serious about us. With this man, I might be able to create a happy family. After 6 months of dating, I could see that. I swear I will love you for the rest of my life, so will you marry me? Are you sure? I have your mother to think about. Are you sure it's okay with me? I want to marry you because of you, because I love you. Thank you so much. Please take care of me from now on. I'm so happy, that was the only word in my mind. People around me were getting married one after another, and some of my friends were having children. I was a little impatient to get married, and since I had to take care of my mother, I felt that the hurdle to marriage was a little high. That is why I was so happy that tears came to my eyes when he said he wanted to marry me like this, and I thought from the bottom of my heart that I would definitely be happy with him. And although it was small in scale, we had a wedding, and we began our life together as 3 people. He readily accepted my mother's care because we had talked about it when we were dating, and we split all living expenses on the condition that I would basically take care of her. But, after we got married, I started to see his true nature little by little. Hey, about our life, I think it's a little strange that you and I split it 50-50. What? What do you mean? It's not right to split it 50-50. So why do I have to pay for your mother's living expenses as well? Don't you think it's strange? I never thought I would be told something like this. It was true that we had talked about paying for each other's living expenses when we got married, and that's why we decided to split the cost of living 50-50. And yet, there is no need to say such a thing. Because we are not paying any rent. This house was inherited by my mother from her parents, and we are allowed to live there. That is why I dared to say that we should cut our living expenses in half. If I don't cut my living expenses in half, shouldn't I pay a little rent to my mother? I don't mind if I bear my mother's living expenses, but if we are going to divide them that tightly, shouldn't I pay a little rent to my mother? It's such a wreck of a house, it's not worth the rent, is it? I have no choice but to live in it because taxes will be imposed on me even if you keep it. If there is no one to live in the house, it will deteriorate rapidly. No one would rent a house like this, and I'd like to thank you for that, but your mother can't even maintain this house on her own. Indeed, what my husband is saying is not wrong. My mother alone cannot manage this house, and on the contrary, the house itself would be ruined. But, isn't it true that we can actually live here without paying rent? I was a little angry at this husband who interpreted reality in his own convenient way and tried to round me up, but there was no point in complaining outright. Besides, the lack of rent wasn't putting that much pressure on the family's finances, even with basic living expenses deducted from my salary, so to avoid further complaints, I decided to pay for all of my mother's living expenses from now on by myself. I heard you fighting yesterday. I'm sorry about me. You're already married and all I do is bother you. What are you talking about? I don't think I'm bothering you. It's true that we had fights, but it's not your fault. On the contrary, we should be thankful to you. We should leave people like that who say insane things alone. Because we are a married couple, I want to take care of my husband. However, my mother was just as important, if not more so, than my husband. I don't want to compromise on my mother in order to have a good relationship with my husband. That is why I maintained a strong attitude toward my husband only when it came to my mother. My mother seemed to be concerned that I might damage her relationship with my husband, but that is not that important to me. Where I can compromise, I do so firmly, but where I can't, I don't compromise at all. I think I kept my relationship with my husband on an equal footing because I was firm in my intentions. Then one day, about a year after we got married. I'm home, oh, Mom. When I came home from work, to my surprise, my mother was lying in the living room. I had set up a camera to watch over her, but why hadn't I received any notification? My mind went into a panic as I saw my mother unconscious in front of me, but I immediately called an ambulance and went to the hospital. Fortunately, she regained consciousness in the ambulance, which gave me some relief, but what the doctor at the hospital told me was an unbelievable fact. The disease has progressed considerably, and he may not have much longer to live. And as you can probably feel even now, her respiratory system has been damaged so much that she will probably need a ventilator from now on. Can't you do something to cure her? We have done our best, but things don't always go so easily. According to the doctor at the hospital, there was an infinitesimal chance that my mother's disease would be cured, and she would have to spend the rest of her life with her family while wearing a ventilator. I could not accept the reality of this sudden situation and sat alone in the hospital chair for a while. But just as I could not accept the reality, my mother must have been absolutely shocked. I did not want to leave my mother alone in the hospital room, so after taking a deep breath to calm myself, I went to her. Mom, did you hear from the doctor? I heard all about it. Looks like it's almost time to pick me up. Well, I've been a nuisance to you, and now I'll be watching over you from up in the sky. Don't say that. You haven't lost all chance of getting better yet. Don't worry, I knew this would happen. If you were there for me until the very end, I would be happy. You are the only family I have left, and I am happy that you will always be by my side. My mother smiled and said that to me. She's really, really strong. Something in my mother's words blew me away. If I continued to be sad, the time I could spend with my mother would just go by in vain. Then, in order to make the rest of her time with me more meaningful, I had no choice but to look forward and walk forward. That is what I told myself. I went home early that day and told my husband what had happened. Well, so? No need for hospitalization or anything, so it won't cost that much money, right? Yes, but it will cost a certain amount of money to rent a ventilator. Well, I will pay for that out of my salary, so don't worry about it. Living with a ventilator, you don't have to do such a bad thing. What did you say? What does my husband think of my mother's life? Sure, to my husband, she may just be his mother-in-law. But to me, she is my only family. You know that, and I'm sure I've even told you how grateful I am to my mother for being my mother and son, and I'm sure we've talked about that. How could my frail mother, who worked so hard to raise me, and you know that, how dare you say such heartless things? Don't be silly. How can you say such horrible things? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that with bad intentions. How can you say such a thing when you don't mean it? But there was no point in bothering my husband any longer. I wanted to concentrate on my mother and not fight anymore. I went straight to sleep that day, and the next day was Saturday and I was off work, so I headed to the hospital first thing in the morning. They said we could go home that evening, so I finished the ventilator procedure, etc., and went home in the evening. My husband was out somewhere, but my mother and I decided to get some food to go that day. Delicious. Yes, but... Oh, my husband? I think he's probably out having a drink with his friends. It doesn't matter, even Mom would be bothered if he was with us, right? My mother was concerned about my relationship with my husband, but it didn't matter to me. It doesn't matter if they don't get along. Rather, I was beginning to think that I might divorce my husband in the future if he did not care about my mother. I was beginning to think that. The reason why I don't divorce now is because I didn't want to take up my time with my husband when my mother is in a very important period of her life. If I divorced, it would be a lot of trouble, and if he would do it on his own, that would be fine. I would finish everything after the time with my mother was over. That's what I decided. I took care of my mother every day, but her condition continued to worsen. In the beginning, she was able to go out to some extent, but after 6 months, she was bedridden all the time and had difficulty getting around by herself. One day, I was thinking that it was time for me to take a leave of absence from work and concentrate on caring for my mother. One day, I was thinking that I had to take a leave of absence from work and focus on taking care of my mother. All the people in the company were left behind and could not leave until the culprit was found. Oh no. I had to get home as soon as possible. Anyway, I informed my mother and husband that I would be late. Maybe this will drag on into the night, I thought so, but the money was quickly found and I was home after 2 hours of restraint. I said, "I'm home," but there was no answer from inside the house. My husband, has he come home yet at this hour? The message online is already read. That's strange. When he works overtime, he always says he's working late, so I thought he was already home. With these thoughts, I went to my mother anyway, and to my surprise, the respirator had been unplugged. My mother was in a lot of pain, and for a moment my mind went blank. How could this be happening? But after a moment's pause, I quickly turned on the respirator. Because she was not completely unable to breathe on her own, my mother managed to regain her composure, but what in the world had happened? I don't think my mother would have disconnected the power by herself. No. It was physically impossible. Then who in the world? What the hell is going on? Actually, Harry pulled it out. He said it was useless to spend any more money on a vegetable like you. Harry, that was my husband's name. At this moment, I completely lost my patience. There are some things you can do and some things you can't do, no matter how much you want to. As a human being, can't you even distinguish such a simple thing? What my husband was about to do was a crime. Whether he understood that or not, anyway, I completely snapped. My husband was out somewhere, but when he came back, I would show no mercy. With this in mind, I kept waiting for him until midnight. Then, my husband came home a little drunk, as if he had been out drinking. I was standing at the entrance waiting for him, so he must have been a little surprised to see me. "What are you doing up at this hour?"
Don't play dumb with me. Don't tell me you don't remember what you did. What the hell were you thinking when you unplugged my mother's ventilator?
Oh. As I said this, my husband looked away from me. I guess he is aware that what he did was a bad idea. But I'm not going to let him just shut up and get it over with. I'm going to pursue him thoroughly, and that's how angry I was exploding.
Why did you do that?
Think about it, your mother just eats food and poops, she's no longer living a human life. And yet you pay expensive rental fees, it's a waste of money. She has no dignity as a human being, so the sooner we get her out of there, the better, of course. Don't be silly, don't be silly. My mother is my irreplaceable family member. Her life is precious to me. I was tempted to reach out to my husband, but if I did, it would be my fault, and there was no way my mother would be pleased. I told myself that and managed to restrain myself. There was no point in talking to this guy, and I couldn't bear to hear his voice any longer. I went to my mother's room and went to bed that day. After that day, my husband and I never spoke to each other again, and I quit my job to take care of my mother. I couldn't imagine being alone with my husband. The day after I made the decision to divorce this man, my mother's condition began to deteriorate rapidly. After that, it happened really fast. Within about a month, she passed away.
No way, Mom.
My mind went blank, but my mother never woke up. Why did she leave me alone? Of course, I had been prepared for this to some extent since my mother was rushed to the hospital. It was inevitable that this day would come. I thought I told myself that, but when the day actually came, I was struck with unbearable grief, suffering, and despair. But there was no time for me to grieve, there was so much to do, immediately making arrangements for the funeral and other things. I was left to do everything on my own, as my husband did not help me at all. After a short time, I took the divorce papers to my husband. I said, "You already know I'm not going to stay married to you, so will you sign this for me?" When I said this, my husband refused to do so. "What are you talking about now?" He put my mother's life in danger, there was no way I was going to live with him any longer. I could not understand why he refused, but he opened his heavy mouth and began to explain little by little. "I have to be hospitalized for a little while. I can't divorce you right now, 'cause I have a cancer. I can't live without your support." What? Cancer. She always went out for a drink in good spirits, and I never once saw her in a weakened state. Maybe I just didn't notice the changes in my husband's health because I was so unsympathetic to my husband, who never worried about my mother at all, but, what do you say, it's because of cancer? Do you think I would be worried about my husband now? If that's what you think, please don't be mistaken. I would never worry about you. What the hell do you think you did to my mother? Don't tell me you've forgotten that. You put my mother's life in danger, and now you want me to worry about you? So what? I hear I'm going to be in the hospital for quite a long time, and I'm going to have to quit my job. You can see that I won't be able to live without your support, can't you? You think you're poking fun at people? What?
Who do you think is going to provide support for you? You can't keep making fun of me like this.
I say loudly and angrily to my husband, and he looks dumbfounded. No. Why are you surprised? If you were aware of what you did, you wouldn't think I would support you. No. It's because you don't think what you did was wrong that you can make such a brazen request. I was completely taken aback, but since I am a person with no common sense to begin with, maybe that's as much as I deserve.
You told me that the money I spend on my mother is nothing but a waste of money. For me, the money I spend on you is nothing but a waste of money. I will not support you in any way, including financially. If you want to stay in the hospital, I think you should do it on your own, and if you can't, why don't you rely on someone else? You don't have the right to tell me that. You and I are a married couple, so you have an obligation to support me. We're not divorced yet, so I won't let you say what you want.
Then I can call the police on you, can't I? The police. The moment I said the word police, my husband was quite surprised. No way, no, I guess it's no way. I think my husband probably has no idea that what he did to my mother was a crime. It's appalling, but, He's an insane person, so I guess it's just a normal thing for him to do. If you had unplugged the ventilator and my mother had died the way she did, how would you have taken responsibility? But, your mother didn't actually die. Even if she had, you did it intentionally, so it was an attempt, right?
No. That was an accident. It was an accident.
Accident. What are you talking about now? Don't tell me you've forgotten what you said at that time. It wasn't an accident, it was my husband's intentional act.
First of all, the fact that you intentionally unplugged the power, everything you did was recorded by the surveillance cameras, and when I submit it to the police, it will be irrefutable evidence.
You know that, don't you?
What? What the hell is that?
I mean it, so don't get too upset with me. Divorce now or be reported to the police, I don't care which you choose, but don't make any more foolish choices, I said, and my husband turned his head and was silent for a moment, then he picked up the divorce papers and began to sign them. I don't care what happens to my husband. I just wanted to get rid of this person, that was all I wanted. I took the signed divorce papers and submitted them to the city office. The house was mine because I had completed the inheritance, etc., and since the divorce from my ex-husband had been finalized, I asked him to leave immediately. Even if you ask me to leave right now, there's the matter of where to move. As I've said many times, I don't have that kind of money to spare.
Then why don't I tell them all the circumstances and have your parents take you in? What the hell are you going to tell them about all the circumstances?
What do you mean, everything you did to my mother? Since he can't get any help from me, my ex-husband has no choice but to ask his parents for help. His parents are really strict people. They would not want me to report what I did. If that was the case, why did you do it in the first place? I was angry, but anyway, all I wanted was to get rid of this person. My ex-husband must have understood my feelings, because he agreed to move out by the end of the day. Then I was able to completely cut off my ex-husband, and I was free. But I don't want it to end there. Hello, it's been a while. I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to call, but there's something I need to talk to you about. After everything had settled down, I contacted my ex-husband's parents. They had heard from my ex-husband about the reasons for the divorce, but to their surprise, they said that I had been having an affair. But I told them why I was divorcing him, and also told them all about my mother's death and what my ex-husband was doing to my mother on a daily basis. Did he do that to her?
I'm so sorry. I don't think an apology now will ever be forgiven. I'm sorry.
It wasn't that I wanted an apology from his parents. But as someone who has a relationship with that person, I wanted them to know who that guy was. I wanted them to know, or should have known, how brutal he really was, and how devoid of any human compassion he was. I don't want you to apologize, but I think you should know what he really is. I know you're working on hospital bills right now, but you should think about what you're going to do from now on. I just want you to understand that he is someone who thinks nothing of human life. Okay, actually, he is supposed to be discharged from the hospital next month, and after that, we'll give it some thought. Then I left them both, but I don't think what I did was wrong. Of course, I believe that no matter how evil one's son may be, a parent is supposed to offer unconditional love. I know that no matter what I do, my mother will always be on my side. I don't think that's wrong, and I think they should do as they please. And I'm not a big enough person to have any say in the parent-child relationship. But, those two were strict about education and had decent sensibilities. They later brought me a sum of money in the form of alimony. I did not want the money, but they said they wanted me to receive it somehow from them both and that they would charge this money to my ex-husband, who had started working, so I was grateful to receive it.
Thank you very much. Well, it may not matter to you anymore, but we have decided to cut ties with that guy too. Because as human beings, we can't call someone who has crossed a line we shouldn't have crossed, family anymore. I know it's too late to say this now, but I'm sorry I didn't notice anything. Now then, I pray for your mother's soul.
I wonder how someone like my ex-husband could have been born from such fine parents. How could he betray not only me and my mother, but also his own parents? How much better it would have been if it had been my ex-husband who would be gone from this world instead of my mother. I thought that, but there was no use thinking about it anymore. I took the money and left. I then decided to study design, which I was interested in, while making ends meet with the consolation money I received. 3 months later, I was even able to get a job at a small company as a designer with no experience, and I am now forming a career as a designer. I think I'm good with new relationships for a while, and now I'm going to concentrate on my own work. Fortunately, my relationships within the company are extremely good, and I have a good rapport to my mother every day. I don't know if I will remarry in the future, and I can't imagine what the future will look like in 5 years, but one thing is for sure. One thing is certain, I will live my life without shame for my mother who is watching over me in heaven. My mother asked only one thing of me, to live a sincere life as a human being. No matter what kind of life I lead from now on, I want to lead a life that my mother will accept me with a smile when I meet her in heaven decades from now. Incidentally, my ex-husband was disowned by his own parents after he was discharged from the hospital, and he had a very hard time finding a new job. He finally found a new job as a baggage handler, but he was not strong enough to make good human relations even within the company, and he is leading a life of maximum stress, it seems. However, he has his own life and alimony to pay, so he cannot quit the company. It must be very hard, but what he has done is only now coming back to him. I don't feel sorry for him at all, and I hope he continues to suffer for the rest of his life until he dies. What you do to others will always come back to you. As the saying goes, if you live diligently, there will be consequences, and if you live your life looking down on others, the day will surely come when they will look down on you. I hope to continue to live my life with my heart in my chest, without causing trouble to those around me. That is what my mother would have wanted, and that is what I think I should do.